June 24, 1940. The French coast at Calais smells of oil, gunpowder, and salt. Above the grey water, Flight Lieutenant Peter Kazanov fights for his life. Enemy, his Spitfire serial number N3162 shudders violently. A cannon shell from a Messerschmitt has torn straight through his oil cooler. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine screams like a dying animal. Black smoke pours from the cowling. 2 minutes, maybe less, before the engine seizes. He looks down. Below him, territory. Behind him, home, 22 miles across the channel, far beyond reach. He breathes once, hard, makes his decision. He'll land the plane, burn it, and surrender. Better a prisoner than a corpse, better ashes than a gift to the enemy. The landing is textbook, as if his body remembers what his mind can't process. Wheels up, flaps down, a gentle skid across the wet sand. When the aircraft stops, Kazanov unbuckles, fumbles for his matches, but shouts echo across the dunes. German troops are already sprinting toward him. He barely gets one match lit before they surround him, rifles aimed, shouting in confusion and triumph. He drops it. The flame dies in the sand. Within hours, Spitfire N3162 is surrounded by engineers and officers, snapping photographs, sketching every curve, every rivet. To them, it's a trophy. To the Luftwaffe, it's a breakthrough. But what they've really captured is a nightmare, a riddle that will consume thousands of engineering hours, humiliate Germany's brightest minds, and reveal that Britain's primitive fighter hides genius behind simplicity. Because as the wreck is loaded onto a flatbed and sent north to Rechlin Test Center, no one suspects that this one crash will expose the Luftwaffe's most dangerous flaw, not in combat, but in thinking. By 1940, German design culture had one guiding principle: optimization through complexity. Every part of a Messerschmitt was a mathematical proof. Every curve, every bolt, every control surface, tuned for precision. If something could be improved, it must be improved, even if it added weight, fragility, or cost. Their flagship, the Bf 109, was the embodiment of that thinking. Narrow landing gear, less drags, more speed, automatic leading-edge slats, better low-speed handling. Fuel injection more efficient, but brutally expensive to maintain. On paper, the 109 was perfect. In the sky, it was a diva, fast, fierce, and fatal to rookies. Meanwhile, across the channel, an Englishman named Reginald Joseph Mitchell was fighting a different kind of battle, not against Germany, but against time. He was dying of cancer. Doctors gave him months. But he refused to stop designing, and what he built was not just a fighter, it was a philosophy. Mitchell rejected Germany's obsession with precision. He believed elegance was efficiency, that an aircraft should be beautiful not to the eye, but to the air in itself. So, he made a single, radical choice: optimize the wing and let everything else serve the wing. That wing, the now legendary elliptical Spitfire wing, wasn't just for looks. It distributed lift so perfectly across its span that drag practically vanished. The result? A fighter that could turn tighter, climb smoother, and stay stable even when pushed to its limits. But here's where it gets strange. German engineers, when they first examined it, thought the British had made a mistake. They called it inefficient, overbuilt, and impossible to mass produce. They didn't realize they were staring at the most aerodynamically efficient shape ever flown by a piston engine fighter. Even decades later, NASA engineers studying high-efficiency wings discovered that Mitchell's 1936 design was mathematically near perfect. He had achieved, with a slide rule and intuition, what supercomputers would later confirm, and yet, in 1940, Germany dismissed it as luck. That arrogance, that belief that superiority comes from complexity would blind them to the truth hiding in plain sight. Because when they finally put that primitive British machine in the air at Rechlin, they discovered something that no formula could explain. Something that made their test pilots question the very laws of flight. November 1940, Rechlin Airfield. A grey morning mist clings to the hangars as Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, one of Germany's top test pilots, walks toward the captured Spitfire. He's flown everything. French fighters, Polish bombers, even a wrecked American Curtiss P-36. But this British machine looks wrong. Thick canopy frames, clumsy landing gear, a propeller that looks oversized, and that absurdly curving wing. He climbs into the cockpit muttering. No wonder they keep losing the Channel War. They build toys. He runs his gloved hand over the controls. Manual everything. No. Servo assist. Primitive, he notes in his logbook, will exhaust the pilot quickly. Then he starts the engine. The Merlin coughs, then roars, deep, raw, alive. Not smooth like the Daimler-Benz 601. It growls, like something with a will of its own. He eases the throttle. The wide landing gear keeps her steady, too steady, he thinks. A fighter should feel aggressive, twitchy, hungry to lift. This one feels civilized. He lifts off, climbs through the cloud, level flight at 300 kilometers per hour, and then something changes. The controls lighten. The airframe seems to wake up. He banks left, and the aircraft responds not just quickly, but intuitively. It doesn't react to his hands. It predicts them. Every roll, every turn seamless. He tries a 6G combat turn, expecting the wings to protest. Instead, the Spitfire carves through the air like a blade through silk. No buffeting, no stall warning. Just grace. 7 Gs. 8 Gs. The wingtips flex, but hold. He feels his body straining against the straps, and yet the aircraft feels relaxed. He whispers into his radio mic. It wants to turn. When he tries barrel rolls and splits dives, the Spitfire obeys like it's reading his thoughts. Even when he inverts the aircraft, the Merlin coughs briefly, then roars back instantly when he levels out. That shouldn't happen. By every rule of aerodynamics he knows, this aircraft should be fighting him. Instead, it feels like it's helping. 40 minutes later, he lands pale, shaken, silent. The engineers rush forward, crowding the wing. Well? The chief engineer demands. Weaknesses? Lerche removes his helmet slowly, looks at the Spitfire, then at the men waiting for data that fits their pride. Its weakness, he says quietly. It makes our pilots look like beginners. For a moment, no one speaks. Then murmurs ripple through the hangar. Engineers insist it's impossible that he must have flown wrong or misread the gauges. But deep down, everyone feels it a small, cold fear. The British machine had just done something the Germans didn't think possible. It hadn't beaten them with speed or firepower. It had beaten them with feel, with an invisible quality no formula could measure forgiveness. And as the engineers prepared to tear it apart, none of them realized they were about to uncover a truth even more disturbing, that every flaw in the Spitfire's design was actually a stroke of genius in disguise. The engineers at Rechlin approach the captured Spitfire like surgeons dissecting an alien body. They strip its panels, measure every rib, every bolt, every joint. On paper, what they see makes no sense. By German logic, it's a mess. The fuel tank sits in front of the cockpit. Suicidal, one engineer shouts. A single bullet, and the pilot should become a torch. But then the math tells another story. That forward tank balances weight exactly near the center of lift, making the aircraft astonishingly neutral, easy to control, and steady in turns. It's not suicidal, it's brilliant. Next, the wing structure. They expected a simple spar, one solid backbone running tip to tip. Instead, they find a complex web of spars and ribs, layered like bones. Overbuilt, they declare. Heavy, inefficient, primitive, until they push it to failure, 10 Gs. At 13, the metal groans but still holds. A Messerschmitt wing would have snapped at 9. The Spitfire's strange multi-spar system gives it redundancy damage one section, and the rest holds firm. A pilot can come home missing chunks of wing and still land. Then comes the real shock, the skin. Not the high-tech load-bearing aluminum that German aircraft use, but thin, flexible sheets riveted onto the frame, almost like a biplane from the Great War. Primitive, they think. A joke. Until they realize it's a feature. A damaged Spitfire can be. Patched in hours, in a muddy field, by a mechanic with a wrench. A damaged Messerschmitt needs a factory and a miracle. The British have built their fighters like tractors, crude, sturdy, easy to fix. The Germans, like precision watches, beautiful, but fragile, and impossible to repair when the gears jam. One report reads, "The English airplane lacks refinement, but possesses an infuriating resilience." They don't understand it yet, but they're beginning to feel the dread. Because every inferior choice the British made turns out to be superior in war. Simplicity means survival. Durability means dominance. And just when the Rechlin engineers start to recover from that revelation, they pull the Merlin engine from its mount and ship it to Stuttgart, to the pride of German industry, Daimler-Benz. They're confident they'll find flaws there, proof that German power plants are still unmatched. But what they discover inside that British engine will shake their faith in their own science. December 1940. Stuttgart Daimler-Benz engine test facility. The captured Rolls-Royce Merlin sits on a steel stand under harsh white lights. German engineers in grey coats crowd around it, confident, curious, and a little smug. This is the enemy's heart. The British call it Merlin. To the Germans, it's a mechanical curiosity, a carbureted relic compared to their precision-engineered, fuel-injected DB-601. Chief Engineer Franz Seidler begins the test. Throttle open, 3,000 RPM. The numbers come back, 1,030 horsepower. Respectable, but the DB-601 already pushes 1,175. Superiority confirmed. The team exchanges satisfied glances until a junior engineer, Klaus Hermann, frowns at the clipboard. "Sir," he says hesitantly, "this test used 87-octane fuel." "So," Seidler replies. "The Merlin is designed for 87, Hermann says, "but our DB-601 requires 100. Should we test theirs with 100 too, for fairness?" The room goes still. A fair test? Fine. They drain the fuel, modify the lines, and start again. Moments later, the gauges spike. 1,320 horsepower. The engineers freeze. One whispers, "That's impossible. That's a 28% increase from fuel alone." Their own DB-601 gains barely 8% with the same octane jump. They run it again. Same result. The realization lands like a punch. The Merlin wasn't optimized to the limit like German engines. It was built with headroom, designed to grow. The DB-601 is perfection, but perfection leaves no room to breathe. The Merlin is potential adaptable, forgiving, hungry. By 1945, that same design will roar at 2,000 horsepower. The Daimler-Benz family will barely crawl past 1,400. Germany had engineered itself into a corner. Britain had left itself a ladder. But the Britain next discovery, just weeks later, breaks not just their pride, but their entire industrial doctrine. January 1941, Berlin. Inside a conference room at the Air Ministry, Ernst Uday, the flamboyant ace of the First World War and now director of Luftwaffe procurement, listens as Seidler delivers his report. The British fighter is built with rivets, Herr General. Thousands of them. Obsolete construction. Slow, wasteful, imprecise. Uday nods, unimpressed. And yet they outproduce us? Silence. Explain to me, he growls, how our factories, our precision, our welding, our machinery are slower than British workshops in barns. No one speaks. Then Seidler answers softly, because they can build theirs anywhere. Udet's face darkens. The Luftwaffe's stressed skin, spot-welded aircraft require specialized equipment, trained labor, and perfect conditions. The British riveted design? It can be assembled in garages, bus depots, even furniture factories. Bomb one factory, and production pauses for weeks. Bomb 10 British workshops, and 50 more take their place. In 1 month, Britain turns out 250 Spitfires, Germany 190 Messerschmitts, and it gets worse. Design changes, Udet asks. How fast can they modify? Engineer Wilhelm Sturer hesitates. 6 to 8 weeks. For the British. 6 to 8 months. For us. The room goes quiet. Then Udet explodes. He throws his chair. Glass shatters. He shouts the same phrase again and again. We have been outthought, not outbuilt. That night, he reportedly locked himself in his office for hours. The next morning, his staff found the desk overturned, papers everywhere. Germany's top aviation chief, realizing that his entire philosophy was obsolete. The British had chosen imperfection with adaptability. The Germans had chosen perfection with fragility, and perfection was losing the war. But the real heartbreak for the Luftwaffe would come not from the factory floor, but from the cockpit. Because soon, their greatest pilots, Galland, Mulders and others, would face the next generation of Spitfires in combat, and learn that the machine they'd once mocked now made them look human. March 1941, northern France, airfield of Jagdgeschwader 26. The morning frost still clings to the grass as overlearning Adolf Galland straps into his Bf 109 F2. He's 29, already a legend, already tired. Another mission, another bomber escort over the channel. But lately, the reports have been unsettling. The RAF Spitfires, once cautious, defensive, have become predators. The scramble alarm sounds. Engines howl to life. Moments later, a dozen Messerschmitts claw into the grey sky. 10 minutes into the mission contact. 12 Spitfires, low, fast, and coming straight at them. Galland feels it instantly. Something's changed. These new Spitfires are faster, their pilots bolder. They don't flee anymore. They attack. The dogfight lasts barely 3 minutes, but for Galland, it feels eternal. Every time he tries to roll, the Spitfires match him. Every time he dives, they follow. When he attempts his standard escape, a nose-down dive and sharp pull-up, he expects their engines to choke. But they don't. The British pilots roll inverted, pull positive G, and stay glued to his tail. They've learned to outfly their flaws. He barely escapes, saved only by another 109 cutting in to draw fire. Back on the ground, Galland climbs from his cockpit drenched in sweat, his hands trembling. At the debriefing, his squadron gathers around. He draws on the blackboard, voice low but sharp. The Rechlin reports tell us the Spitfire has weaknesses, he says. They're correct. It does. But the British pilots don't fight like their aircraft has weaknesses. He points to his sketches, carburetor flooding, ammunition limits, heavy controls. They know every flaw, and they turn each one into an advantage. A young pilot raises his hand. If we know that, sir, can't we counter them? Galland gives a thin smile, tired, bitter. Counter them with what? We're faster in a straight line, yes. But in everything that wins a dogfight, turning, rolling, reacting, they're superior. He looks around the room. What we built, he says quietly, is a racehorse, magnificent in an expert's hands, deadly in anyone else's. Silence. They all know what he means. Too many of their comrades have died in training accidents before even seeing combat. The 109 is a weapon that kills enemies and devours beginners. Meanwhile, the Spitfire, forgiving, intuitive, turns rookies into survivors and survivors into aces. 1,000 miles away, in Rechlin, Werner Mulders sits before a long table littered with data sheets. It's the grand comparison. Spitfire versus Bf 109 F4. Speed, climb rate, ceiling German advantages, turn radius, roll rate, control response, visibility, takeoff, landing, British advantages. He studies the numbers. Then he says quietly, "We're better at the things that don't matter." The engineers look confused. Mulders explains, pointing at the columns, "Speed matters only if you can disengage. We escort bombers, we can't disengage. Climb rate matters for positioning after that. Useless. But turning, rolling, reacting, those decide who lives and who dies." He pushes back from the table, his chair scraping the concrete. The British ask themselves, what wins a dogfight? We asked, what looks perfect on paper? He pauses. Then, with a weary half-smile, says the line that seals Germany's fate, "Those are not the same question." By 1942, British engineers are already working on the Spitfire Mark 9 faster, stronger, deadlier. Germany is still perfecting the same airframe it built in 1939. Perfection had become a prison, and somewhere deep inside the Messerschmitt Design Bureau, a small, classified folder appears. Project 1-1001. A secret attempt to build a German Spitfire wide landing gear, modular design, riveted panels. It's never completed. The war drains resources, and the project dies in silence. But the irony is unforgettable. The Luftwaffe, once the symbol of precision, ends up trying to imitate the very simplicity it mocked. By the time they understood the philosophy, the war had moved on. The Spitfire had evolved, and Germany's once perfect designs were fossils. June 1945. RAF Biggin Hill, England. The war is over. Peter Kazanov, the pilot who crash-landed that first captured Spitfire 5 years ago, stands on the runway, watching a formation of Mark 24. Spitfires roar overhead, sleek, confident, unstoppable. A young pilot approaches him, salutes, and says, "Sir, they found your old Spitfire." The one from France. The Germans tested it over 300 times. They never stopped studying it. Kazanov smiles softly. "Did they ever figure it out?" The pilot grins. "Yes, sir. Their final report said they should have built their fighters more like ours." Kazanov laughs, a quiet, knowing sound. 5 years and 300 flights to learn what any RAF pilot could have told them in 5 minutes. The Spitfire wasn't built to impress engineers. It was built to bring us home. He looks up one last time at those shining wings, still the same shape Mitchell drew when he was dying, still beautiful enough to humble the world's best engineers. And beneath that roaring sky, one truth lingers in war and in life. Simplicity wins.